Stories are alive. Stories are the way we sing the world into being. Stories hold us, challenge us, sustain us. Stories show us where we have come from and where we might go. And stories arise from the larger form of story, which is encoded into the underlying structure of the universe. Once there was a boy, 6 years old, a mass of brown curls on his head, wearing his favorite hoodie, the one with the soft kangaroo pouch pocket, midnight blue of well-worn cotton. Jeans, scuffed beyond repair, without at least one knee, and some black Keds high tops completed the picture. He's standing beside a stage, overflowing with musicians and instruments, bathed in a dancing light. All around him and all around them are people in wild, colorful dress, dancing, singing, eating, talking, filling the space with a kind of surging energy that seems to the boy to be almost visual. The walls are covered with quickly but beautifully painted posters, great splashes of primary colors, and in the room is a tangible wave of generous love. The boy experiences perfection of the moment, and without knowing it, he seals the deal on his life's work. That boy is me. I'm here today to ask some questions about where we are, about the challenges and opportunities facing us, and to propose some tools that may help us take ourselves, our communities, our city towards a rich and engaged future. I believe in, because I've experienced story not only as a living being, but also as an agent of transformation. That's definitely true personally. The most successful work I've done to move forward in my own life has been through various forms of story, but I also see that as a creative transformation tool. It's there all the time, even when I'm not aware of it. Personally, as a composer, the thing people have always said about my music is, I don't know why, but it told me a story, or that's the soundtrack to a movie I'd really like to see. Which to me says there's story encoded in that work. So it has a strong place in my life, but also in the larger things I've done, including what I'm going to talk to you about today, has come out of a story that I found myself listening to, that something is telling. I don't know what it is, but I hear it and I act on it, and out of that has come a really large cultural festival that's still running 18 years later, several wild and wacky multidisciplinary performance pieces, including a jazz circus, and now the project I'm working on. All come from a kind of listening to what I believe is an underlying story. Okay, go ahead. A thing I'm just going to plant a seed in and we'll come back to is a core piece of the story I'm now learning and telling, and that is a real agent of transformation in the city, a potential story for our future, and it's built around a new way of organizing ourselves in our communities and to create space, to design, build, and inhabit and live with public space. The idea I'm calling 21st century village squares, and I'm actually proposing that we discover a way to build these across the city, to create them across the city. I don't know if you can see this, and we will come back to it, but I'll say the key piece is we start with story, and through a process of community, creativity, and development, we end up with these 21st century village squares that are homes to new culture, new economy, new infrastructure, and a center of, I would call it a new power center for places across the city. So a way of weaving the city together with itself. We'll come back to that. To get there, and also to just part of this question asking, I want to talk about the new creativity. There's nothing really new about it. I always call it new because it's perhaps a new way of thinking about something which has always been here, because it is our birthright as human beings. And again, to me, seems to be part of the underlying structure of the universe. when we approach solving problems in our culture, one of the strange things is, at least consciously, we engage with a very narrow band, a very narrow spectrum of our capacity. And we try and do everything through our intellect. And one of the fascinating things I've found since I've started engaging in this work, to go to places where people are really engaged in trying to come up with new answers to challenging questions, is that the only thing they're using are their intellects, are their minds. And they're sitting around in the same old way trying to get a new answer with the old rules. So I think the new creativity, to me, is possibly a useful tool. And it also says, it's also part of what I've been thinking about, to say, we segregate artists, we segregate creative types, we have stories about artists that tell us that they're kind of different from everybody else. They get to do things that other people don't get to do, but we also marginalize them. We marginalize what they know, and we don't really recognize that we have all the same capacities in ourselves. And I think that one of the things that can help us in the future is to rediscover the fact that everybody is a creative being, and that everybody has an inherent capacity to connect with that place from which creativity arises. And the key to the place where in my personal experience, creativity arises is the unknown. And the central thing about the unknown, and I say this humbly and with true experience, it's a hard place to be. It can be. It can be scary, and we like to know things because it feels safer. But in my experience, all the greatest discoveries I've made have come from hanging out and becoming comfortable with the unknown. Kind of what I was saying before about using the same old tools, we have a fetish with expertise. And we only seem to want to experience that which is being delivered, or listen to that which is being delivered by an expert. And once it's being given by an expert, it's already known. We don't want to engage with our own unknown to find out what's possible. So I'm going to suggest a few tools that are available to anybody at any time. They do figure in the work that I'm currently doing with this project I'll get to, but this is something we can all connect to in any way. First is the inner voice. So if we're going to find new answers that draw us towards the future, we need to engage in this widespread use of creativity grounded in the wisdom of the inner voice. So these useful tools that in some ways you can think of as connections to spontaneous story. The first are inner questions. And we could spend days going into this set of inner questions that I've developed with some other people. But what it fundamentally comes down to is the willingness to close your eyes, ask an inner question, doesn't matter what it is, it really could be quite prosaic, and listen for the answer. And really listen for the answer, and listen for the first answer that you get. Not the right answer, not a logical answer, not even an answer that makes any sense whatsoever, but then to work with that answer. And I personally have found that opens up worlds. And so if I have a tiny bit of your trust, I'm going to ask you right now to practice something yourself. And this all it involves is to, I'm going to ask you in a moment to close your eyes, to take a breath, and then to ask the question inside as some of you hear, what do I love? Listen for the answer, and truly it doesn't matter if you hear tennis rackets or moldy cheese or my dog. Just listen for what you get, and then breathe in the truth of whatever that is, even if it seems completely whacked. And then just take a moment with that. So if whoever would like to, I'll do it as well. Let's close our eyes, have just a simple breath, and ask the question inside, what do I love? And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back here. Does anybody want to say anything about what they noticed? Yes, you don't have to, but we can talk about it after. Okay, so but I will say that perhaps you can imagine that following that train can lead incredible places and can touch on anything that you're dealing with. and I certainly have found it the single most useful tool I've ever come across. And it's key to the work that we're doing now. Second is cross-training. Cross-training simply means when you're working on a problem, when you're working to create something, use what you don't know. Go to the place which is not your specialty. It's, again, challenge yourself not to be an expert. So if you're a great designer or a musician or a composer, find something else where you can ask the same questions. For me, that means I use drawing, I use movement, even changing up instruments, playing an instrument I don't know very well, chanting, dancing, all these things brought within. I'm sure people who, you could bring in other things as well that are not specifically in the sort of creative endeavors directly. Could be cooking, but with the intention of your problem or your question that you're asking, I find astoundingly useful, and has been the single most consistent thing that unblocks when I can't find the answer to what I'm doing. Another interesting thing about the question and the answer is listening for perfection. So a really amazing pianist and music teacher wrote a book and started this whole kind of teaching method that relates to all of this. But the one piece I want to get out of it right now that really applies to this is that he gave me the concept that music already exists. That when you're composing, when you're improvising, you are not making anything up. You are filtering and translating the infinite ocean of sound that is part of the underlying structure of the universe. And the reason it sounds like you is because you are the filter. And everything is available there all the time. When you go to the place to compose and you're listening for it, that's what you're doing. You're listening to there's some mystical connection between what already exists and your intention. And so that what I've started to discover over many years is that the key is to listen with your whole being and to know you will never get it right. Because it took me years to figure out why does everything I write sound like shit. And obviously it doesn't, because I probably wouldn't still be a composer if it did, but that was always the experience, that I'm not getting it. It's not right. It's not what I'm hearing, because I finally realized I'm listening to something in a different realm that I'm translating. And you can never get it right, but recognizing that relationship with the inner, with the unknown, can be quite powerful. Okay. All this is to say, we know more than we think. And the key to that is that the knowing can't only come from our intellect. And when you bring your body into it, when you bring all of this inner perception into it, we know more than we think. That's my claim for the day. Where are we? That's another important question, to really take location seriously. What is the vibrational specificity of where you are in this moment? How does it connect to the piece of land you're on, the building you're in, the people you're with? These are things we're processing all the time anyway. Bringing those perception into consciousness can be extremely useful. And I would say that my practicing of that has led to the project, the specific project that I'm now involved in. It's called Diasporic Genius, and it is a vision for the transformation of the city through creativity and through a different kind of creative engagement with all the citizens of Toronto, not just the special people, but actually the special people who are everybody. One of the keys, all of this first part is one of the keys to the work we're doing in Diasporic Genius. The other is an interesting equation that we have the greatest ingathering of diasporic people the world has ever seen in this city. That means we have the wisdom of the world in this city. It is not only a multicultural sideshow. It is not only a nice place to go get a meal. It is not only anything really to do with ethnicity. It is just simply all the wisdom pathways of the world are represented in the people here. That's astoundingly powerful potential. That's one. Two, we have an equally important piece, which is that the settled culture. Certain people have spent several decades calling it the dominant culture, but I refuse to buy into that concept. The settled culture is, at its best, one of the most open and innovative places in the world, which I partly give respect to the First Nations for setting us up that way. John Ralston Saul has a great book about the Métisization of Canada and the fact that that early willingness on, again, with great duress, but willingness to connect with pretty foreign people who came to these shores on the part of the First Nations has set us up to be historically ready to find these connections. So that balance there in this moment when we are, I think, ready for it, the world is ready for it, gives us an astounding potential. So we have an opportunity now to write the new story. We have the stories of the world, the wisdom of the world that has come here. Incredible gift. We have the settled culture and the stories of this place, which include the stories going back to the First Nations and everybody else who has lived here since then to help create the place, but also the stories of this land. What is the land we're on? What is the geomorphology of it? All of that is part of creating what the new story is. And so how do we propose to be part of that? Okay, very quickly, Diasporic Genius works in performance, education, and community. Community, as I said, is based around the idea of starting with story and not finishing, but culminating in profoundly transformed urban infrastructure that will have a huge number of impacts. I would say the key piece of it is that the development of the urban infrastructure happens backwards, and in a sense, harkens back to the way things used to happen. It is not initiated by a planner. It is not initiated by a developer. It is initiated through a creative process of the people who live in a community, developing their own creative capacity and connecting with interested parties and people, institutions from the rest of the city to explore the question, what is the new story for our community? With the idea that it will transform the space in a very specific way. And our core engine of that is story. So we're working, story circles. With the incredible help of a really profound teacher in Sweden named Inga-Lisa Ulrich, who was mentoring me, thank you, Skype. We are leading weekly story circles in Thorncliffe Park, and we are proposing that cascading and developing series of programs and infrastructure development there will eventually lead to the creation of these 21st century village squares, or one in Thorncliffe Park. And I will say that just very quickly, these concentric circles, we're going to go from story circles to creativity circles where we bring in all of the creative arts and work with what people already know almost as a model of how to take the underlying cultural DNA that everybody is carrying, bring it together into building a new picture, and through a whole bunch of events, celebratory performances, but also at the same time engaging with the questions about how do we develop this place? What do we need to have a resilient economy here? What is our connection with the rest of the city? How do we connect with the story and the history of where we've come from to discover where we're going? Can eventually lead, in our model, to resilient economies, centers of innovation, markets, first level commerce, and again, what I think of as a new power center. So these story circles are up and running, and I personally was profoundly surprised. I thought it would be good, but what's happening is incredible. The level of trust, of cohesion, of love as a practical force, and information that is being shared, in a sense almost inadvertently, by the story circle process is incredible. And all of the people in the circle who are from England, Sri Lanka, Gujarat, Hyderabad in India, Afghanistan, then the Philippines, and Bangladesh, all believe without any shadow of a doubt that this process will work because they're experiencing it. And to me, that's deeply moving. And people say things like, by doing this process and learning about other people in this profound way, it creates a unity where there was none. It creates a cohesion where there was none. We get an opportunity to explore our hidden self and to share it with other people in a safe space and in a way that seems to be so clearly directed towards a kind of transformation. It doesn't feel like we're just, I wouldn't even call it just, because even as a thing in and of itself, it would be a quite profound experience. But the direction there seems extremely clear. Next, please. So fundamentally, that's about bringing creativity to the individual. They already have it. It's just reminding them that they have it and sharing the exploration of it together. Very quickly, the story circles are formal. They're almost ritualized. And they're very contained. So recognizing that we haven't necessarily created that here yet, I'm going to invite you to take a few minutes, and I'll give you the experience. It'll require a little shuffling of chairs, and I will appreciate your participation. So what you need to do is take the person next to you and shift your chair so that you're facing each other. Can everybody do that? Again, you can imagine for a moment that we have created a circle, that we've lit a candle, which actually seems very important, that we've sung something together. That's what how we always start. And I will give you a few very simple instructions, and you're going to share a story with the person opposite you in response to a very specific question. So the key to it are two things. One, whatever side of the equation you're on at the moment, telling or listening, you're equally active and equally responsible for the connection. So the person who is listening is actively listening with your whole body, with your whole being, and receiving the story that the other person is sharing. That's one. Two, to the best of your ability, work with picture language. This is, it's impossible to express how important this is, but very quickly, when you speak in picture language, as I was with my little story at the beginning, where you give specific details of what does it look like, what does it smell like, what does it feel like, the texture, whatever you're talking about, and you'll see this doesn't totally apply to the question I'm going to ask you, but that's all right. In whatever way is appropriate, use specific details as opposed to generalities. Okay? That's really, really key. So the question is that you're going to tell a story in response to, what is the story of my name? And the way that you will tell it, of course, I'll just make some suggestions at the risk of being obvious. What does it mean? Who gave it to you? And here's where you get an opportunity to use picture language. So describe the person who gave it to you with some level of detail. We don't have lots of time, so if you just describe their face, that's wonderful. And I suppose, depending on how long it takes you, you can also get into any associations you have with it. Or, could be hard things, like people always made a funny name out of my name, or how it has served you. How has the name served you in your life? So it's going to be 2 minutes each side, and I will time it. And when the beat goes off, you'll switch. And the other thing is that the other really important key is that until we're done, there's no conversation. You're not commenting on what the other person's saying, even if you love it or you think that's great. You don't say it. You just listen. You receive and feed back energetically to what they're saying. So it is a very simple and clear exchange, and then we switch. Okay, and we'll give it 2 minutes each. And begin. So slowly finish up what you're saying. How was that? Was it fun? Yes. Yeah, I get to go this afternoon and do it for a couple hours. a total surprise. I think when you listen to story, surprise happens. When you're ready to change up what you think the story of your life is, new things emerge. And I think that's true for cities and countries and individuals and families. Yes. So one of the things that this key to the whole development picture that we have, and really it is a unknown thing. I haven't found anyone anywhere else who's doing something exactly like this. At the same time, the vision, the practice is all completely supported and embedded and supported by all these other amazing things that are happening in this city and across the world, I think, as people search for new forms. So we're completely indebted to all of it. But there's some particular thing here about bringing together a kind of staunch respect and place for the individual creativity of each person and their individual capacity, and but not being content to leave it in a nice small group experience, but to say that small group experience can create and participate in massive social change. And there's something that maybe as an artist that I like about that it is the connection of the personal and the larger, and of the inner, but bringing that force together in a larger way. And one of the places where I think this is most easily seen is in celebration power. Again, like story, we can tend to trivialize story. We can tend to say it's something for kids, or it's something that is on the side, just like creativity. Same celebration. Celebration is, if you look at historically, celebration is the driver. I mean, people say war is the biggest driver, and it is, but of new technology. But I think of the technology that we need the most, celebration is the driver of it. Speaking as a musician who has performed on large stages and clubs and at a lot of weddings, which I learned to love because of what I learned that they were and what could be brought there if you had the right attitude. Celebration is an astoundingly powerful force and can be the generative center of new technologies of human organization. And again, it's this new old thing. I think a big piece of all of what's going on, not just in my head, but in the world, is we're reweaving together the pre-industrial with the post-industrial. There's a lot of stuff we lost when we went through the industrial, and we need it back. And that a lot of that has to do with the centrality of each person to their own life. We are not just consumers. We are not customers. Thank you, Rob Ford. We are citizens, and we are free agents who need each other and have the ability to come together. And I think everybody in this room knows it. And celebration is a place where a lot of this stuff gets worked out, and that can be the Kickstarter of all kinds of stuff. So we're putting celebration, a public event, as a kind of attractor in our work in both directions. So it's, remember before I had those concentric circles, there's story circles, creativity circles. Out of that will come these larger scale public celebrations that are part of expressing the new story. Just very quickly, the big one that we're moving to, our first big one, we're going to do some smaller ones before that. In Thorncliffe Park is going to be a winter solstice celebration at the end of 2012. And we're going to use it as an attractor and a way to organize all the work that we're already doing and that we hope to do in the community, in the schools, with community groups, connecting old people and little kids, having youth working with people from TIFF who are working on films to make films that are from these stories, from the story circles, but also start to focus on stories of light, the change of light, stories of winter, stories of places where there are no winter, but where, where there's an absence of this. All of that coming together from the stories of the world and the stories of this place to create a kind of very large-scale, performance-oriented celebration. And I really don't have the time to go into all of it, but there's a picture of how all of that leads, step by step, to the beginnings of new infrastructure. Yes, next please. So I'll just quickly, as I've said, we start with story. Very early on, so this is in the community, very early on, it's already happening. It's who we are. There are allies and partners who come in for a joint exploration. We're not teaching anybody anything. We're not telling people how to do it in the community. And remember, this is in Thorncliffe Park where we're working. So allies and partners who I would call visionary individuals and institutions who have the interest, expertise, and resources to participate come together, although it is totally centered in the story of the community where we're working. And through a creative development process, we do end up here. But along the way, our tools and the pathways by which we work have to do with the development of markets on every level that you can think of. First level commerce, which is a huge challenge in many of the neighborhoods in Toronto, is how can you have a sustainable economy, a resilient economy that is located where people are, especially as the industrial core gets hollowed out. I mean, it's even easy to see in Thorncliffe Park. Thorncliffe Park is divided into the residential part, and north of Overley Boulevard is the industrial part, which is like light industry, and the two largest employers there are leaving. And I don't think any other one's a Coke bottling plant and the other's a printer. They're not going to be replaced by a similar kind of enterprise. So what happens to that space, and what happens to make a place within the community that can develop the economy that people need to survive? Urban agriculture is another obvious coming thing, and this is a key piece to bring in. Celebration we've already talked about, and education has to do with a kind of interweaving of through the creative, an interweaving of all these different things that are usually seen to be separate. Science, the arts, and business, I think, can all be taught to children in a way that, one, accesses all the stories of the world and the different thought pathways that we have represented in the city and certainly that community. And two, gives us new ways of expressing kind of timeless stories that will connect us to now. All this stuff together eventually, and it's already begun, allows us to connect with developers, banks and investors, not-for-profits, and government to actually figure out how to build this new space. And if we are successful, there's two interesting things about this. If we're successful, it will be one of the first time here anyway, where profound changes in the physical space of the city will be grounded in the people who live here and in what they know and in what they desire, what they're moving towards. And we will end up with something that is not young Dundas Square. For this to happen, we all need to be engaged. We already are all engaged, and it's astounding, no matter where people come from, what we're discovering, that people are engaged by the same things. All the things I'm talking about seem second nature to all these people in Thorncliffe Park, whether they're very new immigrants or they've been there for 10 or 20 years, or in some cases whether they're older Canadians. They've been here a lot longer time. So I will finish with, I don't remember how many more slides I have, but I think I'm done. I will finish with a call to action, which is, if anything that I'm saying resonates with you, if any of it is useful, please take it into your own work. Please see what new questions it might spark for you in what you're doing, and please, I think of this as, please open your side vents to the other people next to you, because we're still so siloed. Find the other people around you, the other institutions, the other groups, and this is obviously an incredible place to do that, but there are many other places in the city who are all looking for change, and start to talk about how we can create this change that is centered in the creative power of each of us individually and in us as a group. And I certainly welcome you to join us, to join Diasporic Genius. It's a, well, I never liked this expression, but it is a large tent, and there is room for everybody and for all of your gifts.